What if the one person who could actually help you heal wasn't a therapist or a doctor, but a waitress who accidentally spilled juice on your $1,000 shirt? Lucas Hale had it all: wealth, control, reputation. But one ordinary mistake in a backstreet Portland cafe set off a quiet domino effect that would dismantle the life he thought he had under control. He didn't believe in love. He didn't believe in trust. But sitting in that worn-down corner booth, he didn't just meet a woman. He came face-to-face with a truth no professional had ever offered him. Stick around until the end, because the words she spoke to him might just shift how you see love, too. If someone had told Lucas that a single spilled drink could turn his entire life upside down, he would have laughed and called it nonsense. From the outside, Lucas looked like a man who had it figured out. By 35, he ran one of the most successful hotel chains in America, lived in a penthouse above Laurel Heights, and had been on the cover of Forbes 3 times before his 30th birthday. To the world, he was the picture of brilliance, discipline, and success. But beneath the crisp suits and magazine covers, something inside him was quietly falling apart. No one ever noticed the internal storm raging just beneath his designer collar. It wasn't failure or hardship Lucas was battling, it was emptiness. A quiet, suffocating ache that came from feeling disconnected from everything and everyone. He tried everything. Dozens of specialists, therapists, even top neurologists. He spent weekends in luxury retreats and took high-end medication shipped from Norway. But nothing worked. No one could diagnose what was wrong because technically, nothing was. Then, on a stifling Monday afternoon, as heavy clouds gathered over Portland, Lucas found himself wandering down an alley he didn't recognize, just trying to escape the noise inside his head. That's when he saw it. A crooked wooden sign dangling from rusted chains, Maple and Main Cafe, EST 1993. The painted letters were uneven. The door groaned as he pushed it open. The air smelled like fresh sourdough and cinnamon, and soft piano music, maybe Chopin, drifted in the background. He had no way of knowing it, but by stepping through that doorway, he wasn't just entering a cafe. He was walking into the first real moment of his healing. Lucas slid into the farthest booth, hoping to disappear. No emails. No meetings. Just a moment to breathe. And then, she showed up. She didn't have the polished look he was used to. Her black apron was wrinkled, her sneakers scuffed, and her hair thrown up in a messy knot like she'd barely had time to care. But her eyes, those eyes didn't just glance at him like a customer. They looked right through him, like they saw the man behind the mask. "Good afternoon," she said gently, holding a small notepad. "Would you like a menu? Or maybe something cold? Juice, maybe," she added with a warm, almost hesitant smile. Lucas gave a small nod, barely a reaction. He didn't really want juice. He just didn't have the energy to say no. A few moments later, she came back, tray in hand, steps quiet. But just as she reached his table, her hand gave a small tremble. Maybe the tray was too full. Maybe the glass was slick. Whatever the reason, it slipped. And in slow motion, the bright red juice poured down the front of his crisp white shirt, like a streak of paint on a blank canvas. The cafe went still. There he was, this polished, well-dressed man, drenched in fruit juice, in a tiny alley cafe. You could feel the tension rise like a held breath. Everyone braced for the blow-up. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," she gasped, her voice cracking. "I didn't mean to. Let me get a towel, or I'll cover the dry cleaning or—" But Lucas didn't explode. He didn't even flinch. He just looked at her, not her face, not her apron, but into her, like something long buried had stirred the moment she spoke. "It's fine," he said softly. Calm. Clear. "Really?" She blinked, clearly surprised. "Are you sure?" "I can't know. It's just juice," he said, as if those 3 words had more meaning than anyone realized. And that's when something shifted. The waitress, Sophie Caldwell, gave a small, embarrassed smile, her cheeks a little flushed. She turned to grab a napkin, but Lucas's eyes followed her. There was something about the way she moved, careful, gentle, like she was trying to make everyone in the room feel seen and safe. A few minutes later, she returned, now with a new glass and a faint grin. "This one," she said, placing it gently in front of him, "comes with a no-spill guarantee." Lucas let out a small laugh, quiet, surprised. It had been years since that sound had come from him naturally. "That's already better than most contracts I've signed," he said, almost amused by himself. She raised an eyebrow, curious. "Lawyer? Hotel?" he muttered. "One of those guys who never really switches off." Sophie tilted her head slightly and smiled like she knew exactly what kind of man he was, not because he was powerful, but because he was tired. "Ah, one of those men." He stared at her for a second. No one talked to him like that, especially not someone who didn't know who he was. And yet, instead of walking away, she slid into the seat across from him. No invitation. No hesitation. It just felt natural. She placed the fresh glass between them, leaned in just a little, and said, "You know." She tilted her head and said gently, almost like a thought spoken aloud, "Sometimes, you're not broken. You're just tired of pretending you're not." Lucas didn't answer. He couldn't. Her words didn't just land. They struck something deep, something buried beneath years of silence. She gave him a soft, knowing smile and walked back to the counter without waiting for a reaction. He stayed there for another 52 minutes. Not because of the drink, but because of her. He watched the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when she got nervous. The way she leaned in when customers talked, like their words genuinely mattered. No one in that cafe was in a rush. And for the first time in a long time, neither was he. That night, in his sleek Laurel Heights penthouse, Lucas peeled off the stained shirt and tossed it into the trash. But instead of diving into spreadsheets or staring at market reports, he opened the Notes app on his phone. He typed, "Why did her apology feel more healing than all the therapy I've ever had?" He stared at the words, then deleted them. But the feeling wouldn't go away. The next afternoon, he found himself wandering down the same alley, sitting at the same table. Sophie looked up and smiled, surprised. "You came back?" He nodded, honest as ever. "I didn't want to. But I did." She just nodded. "Sometimes, that's enough." They didn't talk about anything deep that day. She asked how he took his coffee. He told her he preferred tea. She laughed and said, "You don't look like a tea guy." And for the first time in years, Lucas smiled. Not politely, not out of habit, but really, truly smiled. Over the next week, he kept coming back. Not for the juice. Not even for the food. He came for the silence, the kind that didn't feel empty. He came for her. What Lucas didn't know yet was that Sophie wasn't just some kind stranger serving drinks in a quiet cafe. She carried her own wounds too. The difference was she had already made peace with hers. And slowly, unknowingly, she was leading him toward the one thing he'd spent his entire life chasing without even realizing it. Healing. And it all began with a spill. Lucas Hale's schedule had always been a battlefield of color-coded blocks and back-to-back meetings. But in the 2 weeks that followed, something unusual happened. A quiet ritual began to rewrite his days. Each afternoon at 4:30, the same man who once thrived on conference rooms and corporate chaos would slip out of Laurel Heights, weave through downtown Portland, and settle into that back booth at Maple and Main Cafe. He told his assistant the block was for strategic reflection. But the truth? It was the only hour he'd ever set aside just to breathe. Sophie Caldwell never made a show of their growing connection. No big gestures. No expectations. She'd simply slide a steaming mug of chamomile across the table, without even asking. She always remembered. Sophie tucked a loose curl behind her ear, then simply waited, giving him space to speak, or not, without pressure. She never tried to define him, never labeled him as anxious or guarded. She just listened. And in that silence, something long buried inside Lucas began to stir, cautious, uncertain, like a wild animal creeping out after a storm. Then came a rainy Thursday. The cafe lights flickered, and for a moment everything went still. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, while raindrops tapped steady rhythms against the window panes. Without a word, Sophie struck a match and lit a small cedar-scented candle, setting it between them. The warm glow softened the space, turning it golden. Lucas noticed a faded scar on her left wrist. And before he could stop himself, he asked, "How did that happen?" Sophie gently ran her fingers along the mark, like she was deciding how much of her story to share. "I tried to save my dad's camera when our house caught fire," she said quietly. "I didn't save the camera. Just myself." The words hung in the air, unpolished and heavy, stripped bare of anything but truth. Lucas felt something shift inside him. A pang. An ache that wasn't just his own. When the storm eased, he did something unexpected. "Want to go for a walk?" he asked. Sophie simply nodded. She closed out the register, flipped the sign to "See you tomorrow," and stepped into the rainy evening beside him. They walked quietly toward the Mariners' Walk, their shoes splashing through shallow puddles, the reflections of city lights rippling like watercolor across the Silver Lake River. Neither of them spoke, not until they reached the railing. Lucas broke the silence first. "Every time someone gets close," he said, voice low, "I start preparing for the goodbye. Like I can already feel the moment they'll leave, even if it hasn't happened yet." Sophie looked at him gently, brushing rain from her eyelashes. "That's not prophecy, Lucas. That's memory, pretending it's the future." He turned toward her, startled, not just by her insight, but by how exactly she'd named the ghost he'd been running from. He didn't want that night to end. But reality came calling. There was a charity gala in 28 hours, hosted by the state's governor. His board expected him to make a grand appearance. Lucas hated those events, smiles traded like currency, motives hidden behind designer suits. But once again, he surprised himself. He asked Sophie to come with him. She laughed, caught off guard. "I don't own anything even remotely gala-worthy." He shrugged with a crooked grin, then let the richest guy in the room figure that part out. Saturday evening arrived. Sophie stepped out of her rideshare in a borrowed 11:20 p.m. blue gown. It was vintage, slightly worn at the seams, but utterly perfect. Lucas's breath caught in his throat. She looked like herself, just enough polish to shine, but not enough to hide who she was. It was the kind of beauty that couldn't be bought. Inside the Astoria Grand's gilded hall, the night swirled with luxury. CEOs drifted around the room like planets circling donors. Lucas knew the game. Half the people in that ballroom were calculating how to profit from the other half. Then came Miles Everett, his CFO, the kind of man whose smile never quite touched his eyes. He appeared with champagne in hand, sidling up next to Lucas like a shadow with a smirk. New public relations strategy? Miles murmured, glancing towards Sophie. Lucas's jaw tensed. Miles, meet Sophie Caldwell. Miles looked her over like a spreadsheet line item, calculating, dismissive. Pleasure, Miles added flatly, sizing Sophie up like she was just another number in a report. Then, with a glance toward Lucas, he muttered, quick word. Lucas followed him reluctantly, down a corridor lined with heavy oil portraits and even heavier expectations. Once they were out of earshot, Miles's voice dropped. The board's not happy, he said through gritted teeth. You've been disappearing. Word is the Mercier Group is circling. If you don't stay visible, they'll make a move. Lucas swallowed, jaw tight. We have a poison pill clause. Miles shrugged like it barely mattered. Clauses don't stop rumors. And rumors don't wait. Just keep the waitress charming. But quiet. Investors like their stories clean. Lucas's heart thudded in his chest. He returned to the ballroom and spotted Sophie standing by the string quartet. Her hands were clasped in front of her, posture graceful, but her eyes carried a quiet unease. That's when he realized what he'd done. He had pulled her into the exact kind of world that had wounded him for years. Without a word, they slipped out before dessert. They rode in silence through the city, the cab thick with the scent of pine air freshener. Sophie leaned her head against the window, city lights flickering across her reflection. They look at you like you're an equation, she whispered. All variables and leverage. No space for being human. Later, when they arrived at his apartment, Lucas couldn't shake how cold it felt. Colder than usual. Sophie walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the glittering skyline. Beautiful view, she said. Then, softer, but it feels like there's glass between you and everything. Lucas wanted to argue, to explain it away, but the words stuck. Because she was right. His entire life was made of reinforced glass, clear, strong, and completely untouchable. By Monday, whatever calm they had built shattered. An urgent text buzzed in at dawn. Emergency board session. Noon. When Lucas walked into the conference room, Miles was already there front and center, clicking through a flashy slide deck. Phrases like efficiency gains and shareholder value danced across the screen. But Lucas didn't see numbers. He saw betrayal. His chest tightened. His voice came out brittle. We'll reconvene after I review this privately. Miles's smirk was thin and sharp, a blade hidden behind his teeth. One by one, the board members filed out. Lucas shot him a look that said this isn't over. Alone again, he reached for his phone. He hovered over Sophie's contact. How do you explain a hostile takeover to someone who pours coffee for a living? He called anyway. Straight to voicemail. A tight knot twisted in his stomach. He tried again. Still nothing. Then a thought, uninvited and cruel, slipped in. She saw a better opportunity. A richer story. And she left, just like everyone else. That old wound reopened, roaring louder than ever. Without thinking, Lucas grabbed his coat and bolted from the office. When he reached Maple and Main, the little bell above the door chimed like always, but the cafe was dark. Chairs were stacked upside down. Kitchen lights off. Empty. He stepped back onto the sidewalk, rain beginning to fall. And just then, a sleek black sedan slowed as it passed. Inside, Miles sat in the back seat, phone to his ear. In the passenger seat, Sophie. Lucas froze. Miles noticed him, said something to Sophie that Lucas couldn't hear, and then the car pulled away. For a single heartbeat, everything stopped. Lucas's mind fractured into two worlds. In one, she'd betrayed him. In the other, he just lost the only thing that ever felt real. In that moment, watching the car disappear into the rain, Lucas felt something split inside him along an old, familiar fault line. Trust or survival. He could have chased after the car. He could have hurled accusations. Or he could have done what he always did, retreat, rebuild the walls, and keep everyone out for good. But his body didn't move. He stood there, frozen, heart pounding, as the cold rain started to fall harder, steady, unrelenting. Hours passed. Just before 11:20 p.m., Lucas returned to his penthouse. His thoughts were a mess, tangled, raw, exhausted. The city lights below glittered like nothing had changed. But inside him, everything had. He poured himself a glass of whiskey he had no intention of drinking. Then, a knock. Light. Uncertain. He opened the door. And there she was. Sophie. Barefoot. Soaked to the bone. Clutching a sealed envelope like it was the last thing holding her together. Her voice trembled. I can explain everything. But you have to read this first. Before Lucas could respond, heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. Then Miles Everett appeared in the doorway, eyes glinting with a mix of satisfaction and threat. Sophie flinched. The envelope slipped from her fingers and hit the floor. Lucas stared at her. Was she part of the betrayal? Or a victim caught in its crossfire? His chest tightened. One question thundered louder than the storm outside. Who could he trust now? Did you feel Lucas's panic when the car pulled away? Yes or no? Because standing there, all three of them under the same roof, it felt like time had paused, sharp, breathless, dangerous. Miles stepped forward into the glow of the hallway light, casting long shadows across the polished hardwood floor. Sophie didn't move. The silence between them was so tense it could have cut glass. Lucas's eyes dropped to the envelope. It lay on the ground, soaked at the edges from the rain dripping down Sophie's sleeves. His pulse was thunder in his ears. Miles smirked, cool and venomous. Didn't expect me tonight, did you? He said quietly. You always thought you were the smartest guy in the room. Funny how blind you've been. Then something shifted. Sophie stepped between them, voice steady now. Enough, Miles. You don't scare him anymore. Truth is, you never did. Lucas's eyes moved from her to Miles, then back to the envelope. Every instinct inside him screamed. Run. Protect yourself. Hide. But he didn't move. Not this time. Instead, he bent down, picked up the envelope, and tore it open. Inside were two things. The first, a printed email chain, internal messages Miles had mistakenly sent to Sophie. It laid out the entire plan for a hostile takeover, including a strategy to manipulate Lucas's mental health narrative and make his removal look justified. The second, a handwritten letter from Sophie. Her words were careful, honest, small, but real. Lucas, I never wanted you to find out like this. A year ago, I worked for Miles. I left when I saw what kind of man he really was. But he found me again. He offered me money, revenge, influence. I said no. Then, I met you. And you weren't part of any plan. You were something I hadn't felt in years, something real. I tried to keep my distance. But you kept coming back. And I didn't want to leave anymore. I said no, Sophie had written. But then I met you, and I didn't know how to explain it. You weren't part of his plan. You were real. Something I hadn't felt in a very long time. I tried to keep my distance. But you kept showing up. And I wanted to stay. I still do. When Lucas looked up from the letter, Sophie was standing completely still, expression unreadable. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't justifying. She was waiting. Then Miles took a step forward again. But Lucas raised a quiet hand. His eyes stayed on Sophie. Why'd you come back tonight? He asked, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. Sophie swallowed hard. Because I didn't want to be the kind of person who runs the second things get hard, she said. I've been her before. And I hated her. I didn't want you to see me like that. Lucas inhaled, deep, steady, like it was the first full breath he'd taken in years. And were you working for him from the beginning? No, Sophie said firmly. The day I spilled juice on your shirt was the day I stopped hiding from men like him. His voice dropped, more vulnerable now. Why didn't you just tell me? She paused, then said, because I thought, if you knew where I came from, you'd see me the same way you see yourself, damaged. Behind them, Miles let out a sarcastic laugh. Touching, he sneered. But it changes nothing. You're done, Lucas. The vote already happened. Lucas turned to him calmly, without panic, without raising his voice. Actually, he said, you might want to check your inbox. Confusion flashed across Miles's face. What? I may have been struggling, Lucas said, voice quiet but unshakable. But I wasn't blind. The minute you moved behind my back, I moved too. He took a slow step toward him. The poison pill clause triggered last night. Your shares are diluted. You're out. Miles opened his mouth to respond, but Lucas gestured toward the door. You're trespassing now. Leave. Miles froze for a beat. Then, like ice beginning to crack under pressure, his expression started to splinter. But he didn't say another word. He just turned and walked out. The door clicked shut behind him, and the room was still again. Lucas let out a slow breath, and with it, it felt like he was releasing years of fear he didn't know he'd been holding. Now, he said softly, let's see if I remember how to let someone in. The months that followed weren't perfect, because trust, that doesn't rebuild overnight. There were still nights when the silence crept in like fog, heavy and unwelcome. But this time, Lucas wasn't alone in it. Sophie didn't try to fix him. She just stayed. Every day, she showed up at Maple and Main. Apron tied, sleeves rolled, smile real. And Lucas came too. Sometimes for coffee, sometimes just for her. They didn't define what they were. They didn't make promises or chase labels. But little by little, Lucas's walls began to lower. He invited her to dinners, not black tie galas, but quiet, real dinners where no one was selling anything. He told her about his father, for the first time in years. He showed her a photo from his childhood, one he kept buried at the back of a drawer, too personal for anyone else to see. He started learning how to stay in hard moments, how to speak instead of shutting down. And once, on a walk by the Mariner's Walk, he reached for her hand. First, one evening, as they were closing the cafe together, Sophie picked up a marker and scribbled something on the wall near their usual booth. Just 4 words. You chose to stay. When Lucas saw it, he smiled, then took the marker and added one more line underneath. And so did I. Because in the end, it wasn't therapy or science or some miracle cure that brought him back to life. It was presence. It was being seen, without judgment. It was love, offered not as a fix, but as a choice. A daily choice, made again and again, even on the hard days. And for Lucas Hale, a man who once had everything but peace, that was finally enough. Now we want to hear from you. Do you believe that love can heal what medicine can't? Type yes or no in the comments below. If you felt something real while listening, drop a 100 to let us know. And tell us, which country are you watching from? Don't forget to share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes, the only thing strong enough to heal a broken heart is another heart that chooses to stay. Sophie turned to Lucas, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll understand, she said, her eyes shimmering, if you don't want to see me again. But I meant every word I wrote, even if it's too late. Lucas didn't answer right away. He was just looking at her, not with suspicion, not with anger, but with something softer, something real. I spent years building a fortress, he said, slow and honest, thinking I was protecting myself. But all I really did was starve. Sophie took a cautious step closer. So what now?